Let's be honest, most male fantasy writers cannot write women. Not because they don't care or because they lack empathy, but because they're making one invisible craft error that poisons the character before she speaks a single line. Now, I'm not here to lecture you about lived experience or tell you to go read more women. That's not a craft fix, that's homework that doesn't solve the actual structural problem. Because the writers I've seen struggle hardest with this, they've read plenty of books by women, and they still got it wrong. There's something more specific going on, something that shows up in predictable patterns every time, and once I name it, you will not be able to unsee it in your own drafts. Let me be direct about what's actually happening when a female character falls flat in a fantasy novel. The failure has a specific shape, and that shape is failing to write a character by writing it as an ambassador. The moment you start building her as the representative of her gender, every choice she makes carries the weight of a group verdict. If she's flawed, you've insulted half the population. If she fails, you've made a statement about women's capabilities. If she makes a morally questionable choice, you've left yourself open to the accusation that you think women are morally questionable. So what happens? You sand her down until she's right about things she really shouldn't be right about, and you hand her flaws that are secretly virtues. She's stubborn, but that stubbornness saves the day. She's impulsive, but her impulses are always correct. You've built a thesis that happens to have a name. I know the objection coming. My story is about a woman navigating a man's guild. She's supposed to represent that experience. Sure, I'm not arguing the story can't be about gender, but representing something and being someone are genuinely different jobs, and you need to separate them in your head before you start drafting. She can defy every expectation the world throws at her and still have petty motivations, still be wrong about something she's absolutely certain of, still hold a belief the story eventually dismantles. The defiance is plot while the personhood is her. Those lie at different levels of the architecture. The fear underneath this, and I think it's worth naming honestly, is that you're scared of getting her wrong. Scared that a flaw in her becomes a flaw you've assigned to women in general. Maybe a little scared of what that says about you. So the defensive move is to build a character who's essentially unkillable by criticism. Nobody can accuse you of sexism if she's perfect and always right. What you haven't noticed is that this move carries its own buried insult. The she's not like other women, she's strong instinct. The idea that your female character is great specifically because she transcends her gender, because she's one of the few, quietly implies that normal women are boring and weak, that the ones who aren't are the exceptions. Sophia McDougall wrote about this years ago, pointing out the contrast. When we praise a male character, we reach for a long list. He's brilliant, unstable, vain, funny, obsessive, reckless, tender. When we praise a female character in fiction, we reach for one word: strong. That's not a compliment. That's a cage made of good intentions. So here's the standard I want to plant right now, because the rest of this video is going to keep testing it. Write a person, not a statement. Brandon Sanderson doesn't sit down to write a woman. He sits down to write Siri, the specific person, the specific wants, the specific history that makes her react the way she does. That's not an accident of his genius, it's the method. He said explicitly that you make a character first and a plot device second, because nobody is just a love interest in their own mind. The framework every character, male or female, has to survive is simple. Who is she and what does she want? Why can't she have it? What does she actually do to try to get it? Why doesn't that work? How does the attempt change her, and where does she end up? 6 questions. None of them are academic. You could answer them on a napkin if you'd write small enough. The place most male writers fumble isn't the first question or even the second. You can usually tell me who she is and what she wants. The place it goes wrong is the third. Why can't she have it? Because here's the thing. The lazy answer to that question, the answer that feels thoughtful and socially aware, is almost always some version of because men or because the society she lives in doesn't accept women in this role. And those can be real, true, valid answers in a fantasy world. The problem is that when that's the only answer, when her entire obstacle structure is just the weight of gender, you've bolted her engine to men. She can't have a story that isn't about us. Every scene she's in, we're the problem she's solving. The moment we stop being in the room, she has nothing to push against. She's allowed a problem that has nothing to do with being a woman. Full stop. The problem can be an unresolved betrayal, a skill she built around a wrong belief, a loyalty that's actively destroying the thing she loves, an ambition she hasn't admitted to herself yet. Let me actually build one quickly. A cartographer. She spent 10 years making the most precise maps the guild has ever seen, and nobody will trust them for navigation. Not because she's a woman, though that's part of the ambient resistance, but because she refuses to mark certain coastal areas as traversable. She knows something moves in those waters. She saw it as a child. She has no proof. And her maps keep getting corrected by people who've never stood on that shore. What does she want? Validation. Why can't she get it? Because her knowledge is experiential and unverifiable, and she's built her entire professional identity on precision, on proof. And now the most important thing she knows has no proof attached to it. What does she do? She forges one data point, just one. She obviously does it to get the maps taken seriously. But that corruption of the one thing she stood on, precision, is what the story costs her. See what happened there? Her gender shapes the ambient friction in her world. It is not the engine. The engine is a belief she holds about the relationship between truth and evidence, and what she's willing to do when truth exists outside evidence. The flaw fell out of her, not off a checklist. And Mary Sue isn't just overpowered. That's the surface red, and it misses the actual problem. The real tell, the mechanical tell, is that the world bends to accommodate her rather than her being changed by the world. Every character in a story should have some kind of pressure applied to them that reshapes them over time. And Mary Sue is pressure-proof. The world throws its tests at her, and the tests quietly soften rather than her rising to meet them. It often works like this. The enemy underestimates her at exactly the convenient moment, or the skill she never trained for shows up fully formed the instant the scene needs it. Sometimes even both. Either way, the story's tension drains away, because tension is only tension if the outcome is actually uncertain. The male writer version of this, the specific version, is what I'd call the strong female character checkbox. You made her tough so no one could call her weak. You gave her a dramatic introduction, maybe a fight she wins, maybe a line sharp enough to show she's smarter than the men around her. And then you gave her one thing to be: she's strong. That's the whole character. McDougal's contrast is the cleanest articulation of this I've found. Sherlock Holmes gets to be brilliant and vain, chemically dependent, rude, and meticulous about tidying certain things while ignoring others. A spectrum. He gets to be a fully fledged character, someone real, like an actual person. The strong female character gets one adjective and is expected to carry a novel on it. There's a related failure, sometimes called Trinity Syndrome, after Tasha Robinson's piece from around 2014. It goes back to the character of Trinity from The Matrix, and is about a woman who is genuinely impressive in their first appearance. More capable than the protagonist, faster, smarter, better prepared. And then she spends the rest of the story being a delivery mechanism for plot information, standing at the hero's shoulder watching him make decisions, occasionally reminding him of facts she discovered, and cheering when he wins. She never actually does anything after that first scene. Her entire agency vanished. Robinson's gut check for this is brutally simple. Would you want to be her? Not, is she admirable? Would you personally want to live her arc? If the honest answer is no, she was just a trophy, a plot vehicle, not a real character. And there's a simpler test for load-bearing. If you pulled her out of the story entirely and replaced her with a decorative object, a lamp, say, an attractive one, would the story notice? Would a single scene actually break? If the answer is not really, she was never doing actual narrative work. Now, and I want to be fair here because this matters, a mild Mary Sue can function in the right kind of story. Power fantasy and catharsis both have legitimate uses, and a character who's essentially invulnerable can absolutely work, as long as the story knows that's what it's doing and builds its tension somewhere else. So it's a gradient, not a death sentence. And Mary Sue has also become the slur people throw at any female character who made them uncomfortable, or who had opinions they disagreed with. That's a different conversation entirely. I'm talking craft mechanics here, not personal feelings or politics. What I'm talking about is the hollow feeling, the lack of an inner conflict the plot can actually test, the absence of a core struggle that puts something real at stake. That absence, that hollow center, that's exactly what I designed the free fantasy story compass to address. It walks you through identifying your story promise before you start drafting your novel, the one-sentence internal struggle, and the deeper truth the story is actually exploring. You can grab the compass for free via the link in the description below. Now, my core message here is this: stop gender swapping a man and calling it done. I mean this exactly as bluntly as it reads. You had a male character. Maybe you wrote him for a different project. Maybe he was a secondary character you liked who needed a bigger role. You changed the name. You changed the pronouns. Then you hit export. This isn't a failure because women are psychologically alien to you. They're not. And if you've been told that's the problem, you've been given bad advice. It fails because you skip the build entirely. You never ran her through the 6 questions. She's a hand-me-down, a man's life with swapped labels. And the world doesn't treat her the way it treated him. Doors that were open for him are closed. Doors that were closed for him might actually be open. Relationships function on different social logic. The ambient texture of moving through her world, the small accumulation of 100 micro-experiences, is different. And you ignored all of it because you never started from her ground. The find and replace woman and the thing I'm about to describe are both the same failure wearing different clothes. They're both a writer reaching for a shortcut, because actually building a person from scratch felt harder than modifying an existing template. I love a sword-swinging, foul-mouthed woman in armor. Brienne of Tarth is one of the best characters George R.R. Martin ever wrote, and I mean that with no qualifications. She's complex and brutal and uncomfortable and genuinely moving. Keep writing that character when she belongs in your story. The line is not where she appears. The line is when strong woman only ever means acts like a man and has contempt for anything coded as feminine. That's not range. It's the same single adjective checkbox from earlier, now wearing chainmail. It's still one trait, and because of that, it still doesn't add up to a fully fledged person. Femininity isn't a weakness you're riding around. A woman who cares about her appearance isn't shallow. A woman who values traditional domestic skills isn't boring. A woman who prefers diplomacy to combat isn't a pushover. And if every female character you've ever written sneers at skirts and feels most comfortable in the company of men, that says something about your range that's worth examining. Not from a political angle, from a craft angle. Your range is narrow and you know it. The deepest version of this failure lives at the prose level, not just in the plot structure. This is where it gets instructive. Robert Jordan built women in the Wheel of Time who hold some of the most enormous institutional and political power in any epic fantasy series. The Aes Sedai are a magical order that kings are genuinely afraid of. One of his major nations, Andor, can legally only be ruled by a queen, and for most of the series, women are the only people who can safely touch the world's magic at all, because the male half of that power drives the men who use it violently insane. That's a remarkable macro commitment. But then you read the actual sentences, and women in that series spend enormous amounts of time tugging their braids and smoothing their skirts and folding their arms and, yes, actually sniffing at men. The same set of physical tics repeating across hundreds of characters across thousands of pages, until readers started literally keeping count. It's a case study in the gap between progressive structure and male gaze prose. Jordan was building women with power, and then narrating them from the outside through their bodies and their nervous habits, in a way he never quite applied to his male characters. There was a viral writing thread, this was a few years back, where writers were riffing on "describe yourself like a male author would," and it went everywhere because it named exactly this. The woman introduced via her body before she ever gets to have a thought. The curve of her, the specific quality of her hair in the light, the way the room notices her, and only then, if you're patient, who she actually is. The thread was funny, but the craft observation underneath it was serious. You can get the politics exactly right and still betray the character in the sentence-level choices, in where the camera points, in whose interiority the prose trusts. Here's what every single thing we've discussed has in common, and I want to be upfront. It's going to sound almost insultingly simple. The famous piece of advice is, just write her like you'd write a man. I think that advice gets misread constantly. It was never telling you to gender swap a man. It was telling you to use the same process you use for a man. You don't agonize over how your male protagonist represents all men. You don't hand him one defining trait and call it a characterization. You don't make him a pressure-proof skill or a charm of permanently being right. You ask him the same 6 foundational questions, consciously or unconsciously, and you let the story cost him something real. So the advice here is about process parity, not about erasing gender. George R.R. Martin, when he got asked how he writes women so well, said he'd always considered women to be people. That's a real thing. And if that sounds obvious to you, I promise it isn't obvious to everyone. But even when considered, this is only the starting line. The idea of women simply being people gets you in the direction. The actual work is still to build a particular person. Her specific obsession, the wrong lesson she drew from the right experience, the belief she's never examined because it's too useful to her, the thing she wants that she's ashamed to want. None of that comes from thinking about women in general. Sanderson literally interviewed women as research. Treated it as homework he needed to do, not instinct he already had. The writers who do this well tend to treat it exactly that way. As a research problem, and honestly more of a humility problem than a talent one, Because the honest truth is that a bad writer hides a bias and hopes the reader doesn't notice. A good one goes looking for their own blind spots before anyone else does. So, talk to women. Read books written by women. Not as an assignment or to tick a box, as a genuine act of paying attention to the fact that the women already in your life are nothing like a single trait. They are contradictory and specific in ways no checklist ever captured. The research is just that, noticing that, and bringing the same quality of noticing to the page. So again, write a person, not a statement. That's where we started the video, and it turns out that's the whole job when it comes to writing women, if you ask me. But even if you avoid the gender pitfall, that doesn't save your hero just yet. So watch this video next to avoid some of the worst protagonist mistakes that new fantasy writers make.